So in sixth grade, I was in St. Joseph's in Biddeford in Mrs. Underwood's science class. And we had this incubator there with a few eggs in it. And every day for 3 weeks, we would look at the eggs to see if anything would happen. And nothing happened. You know, and it could feel, and 3 weeks can feel like an eternity for children. It was like, I was thinking these things probably are duds or something. And it wasn't until we were convinced that nothing was happening that there appeared a little crack in the shell. And we watched the chicken get hatched. And it's the same thing, when there happens, when we kids put little seeds in these Dixie cups, right, and water them every day in great anticipation that something will happen. And it just seems like there's nothing happening. And then a little green stem pops through the dirt. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to see some progress along the way. Many times we do that. In many circumstances, it's quite appropriate. But there are so many things in life where we don't see anything happening. Maybe things are working, as we say, behind the scenes, or even in some deep place in someone else's soul. We have no idea. And we quickly make judgments about how nothing's happening. Let's get this thing moving. When all along, there has been stuff happening. Today, Jesus says that the kingdom of God is like a seed that is scattered on the field, and the farmer rises and sleeps night and day, waiting for something to sprout and grow. And it says he has no idea how, on its own accord, it does this. He just has to wait and see. Wait and see and ask when it will happen. And because too often we don't see results in things in this life, it doesn't necessarily mean that nothing's happening. This is definitely true about the work of God as well. All too often people complain that God isn't doing anything, that God should fix this, that God's not working fast enough, that nothing is happening. And I think we all have had that experience of being frustrated and impatient, only to see that things needed to be in place first before other things could happen. And it's often just that God is on a different timetable or works in a different way than we do or we want him to do. And I've had that experience, I think, often in the priesthood. Sometimes when I wonder if anything I'm doing makes any difference. I mean, what kind of seeds am I planting? There are times when I think that, that a homily or a teaching didn't go over well at all. Even I was confused in the middle of it, And then I get a letter or an email that spoke about that something touched them. And I'm like, really? I was all confused. I don't know how that worked. Sometimes it's only years later when someone repeats something that I had said, and I don't remember any of it. Or I often thought that it went unheard or it fell on deaf ears, only to say that it did bear fruit. But in God's time, there was more work to be done. And I think parents have this hope, right? Living within them all the time. Your children grow up. You teach them a lot of things. You tell them a lot of things. They move out. And you work so hard to instill something in them in the ways of faith and morals and right living, so they don't make maybe the same mistakes you made. And it can seem that it all was for nothing, right, in the immediate future. That it fell on deaf ears, that it never went in there. And then you hang on to the hope that maybe someday in the future it will bear fruit. That the seed did get into their souls in some way. And it will grow in God's time. And I often think that other things need to happen first. That's what I tell people when they come in and they're talking about God's not doing anything. I said, maybe something needs to happen first. I don't know what that is. Or maybe time needs to happen so that this may grow deep and have deep roots. I have no idea. Or maybe something has to be put in place before the next thing that needs to happen. And one of the elements of having faith is to believe that God is working in some way, even if we cannot see it and we don't understand how, and we would have a better way and maybe some advice we could give God about how we think he should be doing it. But in some way, God is working through world events, through national events, local events, working in our families, and even individually in our souls. And we may not see the fruits today. We may not understand why it couldn't be sooner. We may not even appreciate how God is working at a certain time. But a faithful man or woman hears the calling to be faithful to the task, to water the seeds, to wait, and to trust. To believe that when all is said and done, we were as faithful as we could be to the gospel message of Christ, and so joined God in his holy work of sanctifying the world, knowing that in the end, we place it all into God's hands, who works in ways way beyond our understanding, in his own time, and finally for what he knows to be good. I remember when I was a seminarian, I was living at the cathedral, and some of the older people here might remember Bishop Prue, right? Bishop Prue was the auxiliary bishop here, and he was living at the cathedral as well. That's where I was assigned. And he had a brain tumor, and he was going to Lourdes because he wanted a healing. He was going to ask for a healing there. And when he came back, he said he had an amazing trip and that he had received a healing. And then he said, the healing was that I was to return home and prepare to meet him soon. You know, it was not the healing he wanted. It's not the reason why he went there. But he came back saying he truly was touched and came back a very different person. You know, today, Jesus reminds us that the kingdom of God is upon us. The seeds are planted with his coming, and he continues to grow, even if we don't know how, when, or why. And even more, why not the way we think it should be done? And when we often think that God is silent, or that there's nothing going on, we hear him saying that just because you don't see it does not mean that I am not working. May we live in the hope knowing that God knows what is right and he knows what he's doing. He designed it all this way, and it's our call to be faithful to nurturing and tending to the kingdom. Hanging on to Jesus' words, which I think are very important to me as I sort of go through this life and the many different aspects I experience in a parish and in people's lives. When Jesus used these words, when all has been revealed, the end of time, we now know everything, he says, you will have no questions to ask him.